So good afternoon. I'm Steve Soren with Composer Solutions, and just to make sure we're all in the right place, this is session 26, the transforming the procurement process to improve outcomes, so we're in the right spot. So public agencies in California invest billions of dollars annually in providing services and goods to the service of 38 million plus people in our state. And DGS accomplishes this massive task by using pretty fundamental business processes, both formal and informal. So there's a lot of successes on an everyday basis that procurement goes through. However, sometimes they fall a little bit short. And they're always working to find ways to improve it, and that's their challenge. So in this session, we have a great panel of experts that'll share a lot of information with you today. They'll talk about their perspective on how to improve and address these challenges. They'll update you on how the State Technology Acquisition Reform Initiative is progressing and its vision, the Department of General Services' progress in the procurement and how to make it more frictionless, and how these investments support the administration's goals and objectives. And right after they finish that, the panel will happily take questions and give answers. So the panel. So the first panelist we have, and we have a great panel today. So Andrea Rohmann was, in January of 2014, appointed as the Chief Deputy Director of Policy for the California Department of Technology. And prior to that, she has spent 19 of her 24 years of state service in multiple positions in California at the Department of Corrections and Rehab. And these include Deputy Director of Human Resources, Chief Information Officer, Project Director of Business Information Systems, Special Assistant to the Deputy Director, Financial Services, and Administrative Assistant to the Director of Internal Affairs. And also, Andrea's held a couple of civil service appointments at California Franchise Tax Board and the California Department of Personnel. Andrea has a Master's of Arts degree in Organizational Management from University of Phoenix and a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from Cal State Sacramento. And right next to her is Jim Butler. And as I'm sure everybody here knows, Jim is the Chief Procurement Officer and Deputy Director of the Department of General Services. But before coming to the state, Jim was a Director of Procurement Services at San Francisco-based Levi Strauss from 2002 to 2007, where he was re-engineering with legacy purchasing functions, working on those, and deploying e-procurement tools across the enterprise. Prior to that, from 96 to 2001, he served in several senior manager positions with Dell Computers in Austin. He did things with general procurement, ERP systems, and development of business processes. Before that, from 93 to 96, he led an Asia business development effort for a portfolio of venture-backed clients at Asia Pacific Ventures in Menlo Park. And Jim has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Japanese and an MBA, both from Brigham Young, as well as Certified Professional of Supply Management credentials from the Institute for Supply Management. He was elected to the Board of Directors of the National Association of State Procurement Officials in 2013 and re-elected in 2014. To Jim's left is Gary Watahira, the Purchasing Manager for City of Fresno. And Gary was selected actually by Fresno Mayor Ashley Swearingen and then promoted to Purchasing Manager for the entire city of Fresno. And Gary oversees an annual procurement volume of $145 million. Prior to that, he was the administrative manager in Fresno's Information Services Department and has served the city for more than 28 years. He has served in areas such as budget, general services, the city manager's office, and the finance department. In addition to purchasing function, Gary also oversees the graphic reproduction services team. Gary has a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Fresno State. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first panelist, Andrea.
So good afternoon. The first thing I'm going to recognize is that this panel sits between you and drinks. So I don't know what would be worse, that or lunch. I'm kind of thinking this. So, first off, I want to recognize that really to be able to sit on a panel at a government transformation conference and talk about transformation that we're actually doing, I think is a huge privilege. I think the fact that we've had the level of support that we've had from the administration to be able to come in and do something that is really very different and transform the way we do project approval in the state of California and molding that into how we do procurement of large IT projects is really pretty phenomenal. And so before I get started with the presentation, how many of you are familiar with STAR or the stage gate model for project approval? Great. So the good news is when you leave here today, you will not be able to not answer that question next time, right? The next time you're asked, for those of you that didn't raise your hand, you'll be able to raise your hand. And the reason I think that's good news is because this is where we're going, right, in state government. This is where we're going from a project approval process. This is where we're going in terms of procurement for large IT projects. And so I think it's important that you all walk out of here feeling as though you learned something about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what maybe your role is in that. So how many of you are from actual procurement, whether it's IT or non-IT within a department? How many of you are project? And how many of you are business? Good, okay. Because the thing that you're going to see that is very different from the historical way in which we did projects is that the dependency today on business engagement from day one is significant. And the ability really to get projects sold and approved is really dependent on that engagement of the business. So I'm really happy to see business people here. So with that, I'm hoping I pushed the right button. Oh, I called it exactly what it should be called. Okay, so let's kick it off. There we go. Aha, okay. So what you see in yellow there is where we touch on procurements or where we're impacting the procurement process now. And so that's probably the biggest thing to note. This is just an overview of what I'm going to talk about, and so we'll keep going. This is the mission of the overall effort. So what we did is we kicked off a thing called STAR. I can't stand behind a podium for long. We kicked off this project called STAR, which is the State Technology Approval Reform. Really what it is a stage gate model for project approval. So today you will hear us talk about STAR. As we go forward and we implement and we're done with the project, it'll become an actual entity, a thing that happens in state government, and it will be the stage gate model. So those two will be synonymous in terms. But in essence, what the project intent was about is to transform the IT project approval process to improve the planning, quality, value, and likelihood of success for technology projects being undertaken by the state of California. Those words in yellow are there because those are areas where we are pulling the realm of procurement in to how we do project approval. Historically, what we did with project approval, right, is that we had an FSR, feasibility study report. How many of you are familiar with those? Yeah, it's sad, huh? How many of us know about those documents? That's a 30-plus-year-old document, right? That process was built when we implemented technology in the 70s and 80s, right? Really old styles of technology, and yet we used that process to try to implement new technologies. I don't think we should probably be too surprised that those two processes didn't align, right? And implementing new technologies and using a very old process. And so what we're looking at now is ensuring that there is that focus on the business need. What is it that the business is trying to do? Why is the business doing this? What is the business engagement? And so you'll see when I start talking about the actual stage gates, where business plays a very, very critical role very early on in the project approval process. The intent is to be able to establish more realistic cost and schedule baselines. Right now, what happens with an FSR is you submit an FSR, and by the time you get that FSR done, the technology you're talking about is probably outdated. The projections that you built into that are outdated, and they were best guess, right? That's the reality. I've written a few FSRs, I know, right? You come up with the cost projections, the staffing need, and everything else that's going to be associated with what it's going to take to deliver this, schedule, et cetera, and their best guess. But by the time you get all the way through the process of approval and then get through procurement, which is outside of the approval process, the information in which you built all that on is old. It's years old, and as soon as you get your procurement approved, what is the first thing you have to do? SPR, right? You got to write a special project report, which is a mini FSR, to say, oh, by the way, everything in our FSR is wrong, right? We need more money. It's going to take us longer to do it. We need more resources. And so the intent here, and what you'll see in the process, is that the goal is to get better information, to not make final decisions until you have better information, until you've got the right market research. And engaging the procurement specialist in that process so that we really have an end-to-end solution that gets us where we need to be at the end of the day, which is bringing in a vendor to implement a solution that we all agree is going to meet the business need. It's going to eliminate requests for duplicate information, and that's really for the benefit of the writer of the FSR, right? You know, you write an FSR, and there's so many places in there, and between that and the BCP that you repeat the same story over and over and over again, right? What you'll see, and I'm not going to show you the forms today, but I'll tell you where you can go find those. But what you'll find is that the forms themselves for the stage gate process are drop down, for the most part, boxes, right? They're check boxes, yes, no. Have you done this? Yes, no. Are you doing this? Yes, no. We've gotten out of wanting a whole lot of free-form text. In an FSR, you wrote about a 300 to 500 page document. If it was a really good FSR, it required 1 to 2 big binders, right? Then you knew you did a really good one. And chances were nobody read every page of that, right? You put all this effort into it, and people focused on a couple really core sections, but the bigger problem with them is that it's free-form text, and we can't really do a lot with that information. Whereas with the forms that we've created, we can now do data analysis against the information, right? It's data that we can do something with. We can start using analytics and applying that to the information. And then, you know, the goal is to reduce special project reports, contract amendments, and the overall project realignments that continually happen in a project, because we really don't know what we're getting into until we get into it. And that's the world we live in today. So the project approval lifecycle expected outcomes, structured and guided approach, right? And we walk you through each of the stages of what needs to happen in the new approach. We ask you very pointed and specific questions, and I'll go through that in a very organized fashion in terms of the gates. It's improved planning and guidance. And that's not just for us, but it's for you. So there's a constant collaboration between the Department of Technology Oversight Division, the department, and other entities that may be impacted, such as, you know, our critical partners within the Department of Technology, OTEC, enterprise architecture, et cetera, as well as control agencies like the Department of Finance, so that we're having decisions collectively with everybody, and it's better planning and guidance on what is it really going to take to make, to fix a business need, right? Because the goal ought to be at the end of the day that if we all agree and recognize that the business need is real, then as a state entity, we ought to, you know, group behind that and figure out collectively what is it going to take to deliver that. And we ought to do that in a way that we look for success. And so that's part of what you'll see. Probably here, real key, no one size fits all. Today, the FSR is a one size fits all. I don't care how complex the project is. If it's reportable, you're doing an FSR and you're writing every section and you're writing all it right. In this process, we recognize that there are cases where a project doesn't need that. You don't need to do every section of the S1BA process, the first stage gate documents, right? If it's, you know, a delegated project that you're going to manage internally, and we're just taking a look at from a portfolio perspective, then there's different levels of information and detail that we want and that we need. And so we've recognized that it's not a one-size-fits-all in project approval. We're asking for that right information at the right time. You may hear me say this a few times, but it's because I think it's very important that we all recognize that, you know, we can't make really big decisions with really, you know, with tons of information thrown at us and feel that we're going to make the right decision. We're breaking that down and really what becomes an agile approach to project approval, and we look at pieces of information at a time and say, is all of this here? Does all of this make sense? And if it does, okay, good, we all agree, let's go then to the next part. And that'll make sense when you start to see the different gates. More accurate cost and schedule, I talked about that. And then tools and guidelines to support the new PAL or procurement process. So you talk about procurements, requirements, and those documentations. You know, we've got better tools that we're going to be working with you as departments. We've got better guidelines in there. You know, as I said, our procurement specialists within the STPD unit in the Department of Technology will be engaging with the projects very early on as you're starting to form those requirements. Because one of the challenges we recognized was in having really well-written requirements. You know, as departments, and I've been there, right? I've written projects where we had, I think, I don't know, I'm going to throw some crazy number out there, but I think we had 1,800 requirements in a project I did, and we thought that meant it was really good. It was really important because we had 1,800 requirements, right? Reality was, and John Marengo's laughing at me because he had to handle that procurement, but the reality was that made it really complex, and it made it complex for us, and it made it complex for the vendor community, because 1,800 requirements is a lot of requirements. So really understanding how to write good requirements and how to focus requirements to get to meeting the business need instead of the minutia of organizational process, right? And so we bring procurement in very early. And then organizational readiness, and you're going to see that that's a piece of information that we look at multiple times, and there's a really good reason for that, and that is because one of the other challenges we have found is that, you know, when departments really are not ready to implement technology, whether it's you don't have the right types of resources available to you from the technical perspective, you don't have business fully engaged, we end up with project failures. We end up with problems in projects. And so it's recognizing that organizational readiness is critical. So these are what the stages look like. The boxes in yellow are areas where procurement comes into play, and it's the reason, you know, because this is really focused on procurement from the perspective of procurement, I wanted to be able to highlight for you where procurement comes into play in the overall process. And so what you see in stage one is that the focus there is business analysis, is on understanding the business need, understanding what the business really is about, and making sure that through that process that you have a very clear identified problem or opportunity, that you've established the business case need very clearly and concisely, and that you have alignment to your departmental strategic plan. And really critical to that is that organizational readiness, that you have an organization that has a governance structure and has engagement from all facets of that department that are going to be impacted by this business need. So that it's not IT building a solution that they think meets the needs of business, but it's business engaging with IT to implement a solution that meets the needs of the business. Does that make sense? The second stage, so what happens here, and you see the red, yellow, green at the bottom and the star at the bottom is where a go, no-go decision is made. So that bottom part is where collaboration occurs. And we bring in the necessary entities, and it's the business executives from the departments. It's the CIO or the IT executive from the departments. It's, you know, Department of Technology Oversight. It's Department of Technology Critical Partners. It's Department of Finance. It's the Procurement Division within the Department of Technology. And we collectively sit down and discuss the stage one documentation, right? And so that when we all leave a session, we all agree, either we go forward or we don't go forward. And we all understand why that decision is being made. Today, when you submit an FSR, you throw it over the fence. Oversight takes a look at it, takes them months to go through it, and then they throw questions back over the fence to you, and you answer the questions, and you throw them back over the fence, and they read your questions, and maybe your answers align to their questions, or maybe not, and we go through this back and forth process for very long periods of time, right? The intent here is that we get away from that, right? And that we start sitting down and having conversations. So if any of you listened, you know, sat in through the lunchtime session with Bill Eggert, one of the things he talked about is that while we all have a perspective that technology is going to replace people, technology, he believes, is actually going to create opportunity for better people engagement And this is one of those places where you're going to see that, right? Where it takes people talking and understanding what the issues are to be able to move forward. Stage 2 is similar, except we look at different information. Now we start looking at the alternative analysis. We assess what are the existing business processes. So how many times have you done a project and the first time you start talking about business process is when you bring your vendor in and you're getting ready to start doing your JAD sessions. And you go, okay, let's have our first few JAD sessions to talk about what the current business process is. So we can understand what we're going to change as we build the new business process, and then we have something to map to, right? It's the wrong time to do that. We ought to be doing that very early on because it helps in developing requirements to understand your business process. It helps to know what are the right types of solutions that are available to you. You know, if you have very fluid business processes that are not set in stone in legislation, then that tells us that you're more aligned to cloud or COTS type solutions, right? If you have business processes that cannot be changed, absolutely by law cannot be changed, then that tells us you have components that have to be very likely custom build, right? And so that having that type of information up front is very critical. We get into recommended solutions. We start identifying what that procurement and staffing strategy looks like and what your project timeline needs to be. I missed two very important components up on the top, and that is market research and develop mid-level solution requirements. So that's something fairly new to us in terminology. We may have been doing it in concept, but we really weren't doing it. So it's really taking that business need, translating it now to that first layer of business solution requirements so that when we move into stage 3 and we start developing solution requirements, there's a building block in which those are developed. And market research, critical in order to be able to get to the bottom of having, you know, project timelines and procurement strategies, right? And understanding what's out there. And then we get into procurement analysis, stage 3, which is where we start looking at what procurements we'll move forward on. And then stage 4, solution analysis. I'm moving quickly on those two because I'm going to give you more information in the next slide. So here is where you see really that procurement perspective. You establish that business case, you move into that market research, which is really that procurement-centric component. That feeds staffing, current state, the procurement strategy, the mid-level requirements, the selected alternative, and the high-level schedule that you would use. And it also enables you to take a look at what are those types of solutions that you can look at, even down to the point of existing solutions, right? Does another department have that same problem? How have they solved it? And can we reuse that technology? And really understanding business problems in a much better fashion enables us to do better assessments of that. And it takes us into building your IFB and your RFP, which is where we start to do various cost modeling, requirement statement of work, solution requirements, evaluation method, and key action dates. In the stage 2 process and moving to stage 3, the other thing we do is we start reaching out to the vendor community. Not to say, hey, bid on this procurement, but to say, hey, what do you know? Right? What have you done out there? This is the business need. Hey, take a look at it. What is available to us in the market so that we can start focusing on what might be available, right? Vendors have lots of solutions for us. We have it happen all the time. Any of you in the IT arena know that you come to something like this and chances are you're getting hit on by vendors saying, hey, you know, I've got this great solution for you, right? And you're going, wow, I just need to find the problem that I can fix with that. And they're not doing that to be you know, problematic for you, right? It's because they're going, man, we have so many solutions that we could help you with your business. And because they really want to be responsible partners to the state of California. And so we're going to engage with them and let them help us do that when we get to some of these really large procurements. And then we get into the stage 4 solution analysis, which is your typical RFP solicitation. And you know, we select the vendor, we go through that whole process, and that's probably the key part, what you see on the bottom there, which is where you actually get project approval. So we're working with finance on how that works out from a timeline perspective, but you know, right now, You get you go through the whole procurement process, then you have to submit the SPR, then you have to wait 30 days for a Section 11, and then you can go forward and do your project, unless perhaps Section 11 gets denied and then you have other issues, right? And so what this has done is that we didn't cut the project approval process off at the end of documenting your business need and your alternative analysis and your recommendation. We carried it through the procurement process itself. So procurement has now become a part of that whole project approval process. So incorporating procurement into the project approval lifecycle, what we've looked at is the ability to streamline the process through templates and then organized cataloging of data, okay? So that you're not, again, it's not free flow, right? You're not starting from a white piece of paper and going, okay, now how do I tell this story, right? And when I would write FSRs, you know, as sad as it was, right, I would bring a computer and a projector into a conference room. I would gather some staff that I needed, and it was like, okay, we got to write this. Let's start, right? And people would talk, and we would type, and it was, we were writing a creative story, right? And that's not where we want to be. We want to get to where we're getting really core information about what we're trying to do in terms of improving the way we deliver service in state government, right? And so how do we transform government if we're not willing to transform process to get us to transforming government, right? And that's really what this is. Best practice guidelines and toolkits, so that market research guidelines, so we'll be developing guidelines in that area, and evaluation methods. So providing you with some prescribed evaluation methods so that, again, you're not starting from a white piece of paper and going, okay, where do I start and how do I do this? And our procurement specialist will be working with you through that process. And then collaboration points, as I talked about, extensive opportunities where we will be collaborating with you. We will be in there with you, sleeves rolled up, and working to resolve any discrepancies or issues or questions we have. Because at the end of the day, when we say go, we ought to all mean go, right? And we ought to all then come behind that project to say, if it starts to struggle, what does it take to get it back on track, right? How do we get to success? And so really what you'll find in terms of our administration and our department is that, really our focus is on successful delivery of IT. It's not on gotcha. It's not on trying to develop a process that makes it so cumbersome for you to get to a project that, hopefully you give up before you get there, right? But it's really creating a process that becomes very iterative, that provides you the ability to say, look, we've got a real business need. We all agree to that. Now, what is the information we need to get us to the end of the day? So in developing the stage gate 3 procurement analysis, there's engagement with the vendor community, there's re-engineering roles and responsibilities. Some of that is done through memorandum of understanding. It's establishing clear and defined roles, and then establishing the right staff and expertise in the procurement stage. And that's for both entities. That's for the department and their contract operations and the project, because you need subject matter experts in that process. And it's our staff, right? And making sure that we're assigning staff that have the experience necessary to get you through the various types of procurements that you would be looking at. Ongoing procurement official outreach and updates. So once you've got your procurement in place, right, we don't walk away from our contract perspective. We stay engaged with your department, with your project, to monitor how that contract is going. And why do we do that? Because if you come to a point where you're either struggling in holding a vendor responsible for delivering to the requirements, or you strictly just need to amend a contract, we're not having to re-educate ourselves on what you've done, how you've done it, what needs to be done. We're right there with you. We already know because we have constant checkpoints with you. And then transparency on the procurement process and procedures, right? There's no secrets. So stage 1 and 2 training approach. And the reason I'm putting this up here is because you'll see in I think the next slide on dates, we went live, we released the policy documents and the redeveloped processes for stage 1 and the new process for stage 2 on December 30th. Those will be in a pilot for 6 months. and they become effective July 1. So right now, we're going through a process of actually running projects through those stages, testing out the documentation that we're asking for, working with a few different departments in doing that, and preparing for then any adjustments or modifications we have to make before we actually make you use this as the new refined process July 1. So there'll be some adjustments I expect over these next 6 months. But because of that, we're training right now on, we're preparing all of our training documentation and the training plan for stage 1 and 2. We will be training over the next few months. And we're training lots of different entities. We're training on business, the baseline curriculum of what the documentation looks like. We're training executives because they have a role that's very critical in this process. We're training the business because the business has to participate in the development of the information. And then obviously the IT staff that will be playing a role in how the document itself gets rolled up and submitted. And then we'll be having labs where you can come in and, do live stuff, right? So you can bring actually your information with you and sit in an environment that's supported by people that have developed the process, and help you work your way through the documentation. Because one of the things you'll find when you go out there and look at it at first glance, you might lose your breath. And you're going to go, oh my God, this is a lot of questions. And it is a lot of questions. Not so much on stage 1, but definitely on stage 2. But what I will dare you to test for me is whether or not it takes you longer to answer questions versus write in free form. A story about what you want to do, right? It's a lot of questions, but it's a lot of very pointed questions with a lot of very clear answers and not a whole lot of free-form writing. And the questions are all around, the types of technology you're going to implement, why you're implementing that, what your organization's readiness is, what your organization's success has been, what your ability to deliver on project management is, what your staffing capacity is, and et cetera. And so the internal training for the Department of Technology will be to critical partners, and then web training. So these are high-level dates. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is basically what I just went over with you. And then these are resources that are available to you. This slide will be available when PSP posts the overall presentation, so this information will be available. If for some reason you want information sooner, Andrea Hoffman and Patrick Dennis are here. Raise your hands. They are 2 of the key members on the STAR team. Great resources for you. And if you want to talk to them directly, feel free. There's their contact information. You notice my name's not there. So with that, I'm not going to take questions right now because I think we're going to hold it to the end and because I need to give the others an opportunity to speak. Jim Butler's up next.
All right, thank you. Hey, let me do this because I know we're short on time, and I'm not going to stand between you and your drinks. So let me actually just tell a story. About a year and a half ago, there was a bill passed, Representative Buchanan bill, and I don't remember the name, but it essentially required the governor's office to coordinate task force to talk about this topic, this IT procurement topic. And so my director, Fred Klass, and I got together with Carlos and Anna Brandon, as well as a bunch of folks, Sue Johnswood from the governor's office, and a bunch of folks who are really great IT experts in the state, CIOs, people who've delivered, some procurement experts. Michael Banuelos was on that task force with us. And over the course of the next 4 to 5 months, we actually just worked together as a team to figure out how can we improve IT procurement in the state. And the outcome of that is actually a lot of what you're hearing today. It's the thing that we did that was the most important thing is we moved the procurement function for these large, complex IT projects out of DGS and put it into the CIO so that it would be part, just like Andrea was saying, be part of this entire process. Historically, you had this crazy thing happen where going through the FSR for, I don't know how long it took, 12 months, 18 months, maybe 2 years, and you finally get an approved project with funding and you're ready to go, and what did you have to do? Go do the procurement. And God bless us, sometimes those procurements took years. I can't believe it. To the idea, I won't believe it, but I was here with the state about 6 months, and someone brought me a contract to sign. And I said, this is really interesting. When did this procurement start? 8 years ago, Mr. Butler. No, that you didn't really say that, did you? Yes, 8 years ago. So all the work that had been done on the FSR, all the people that had originally been gathered together, resources to make that a success, they weren't even around probably, right? And so we would then finish this procurement, and then we would go drop it back off, happily on the doorstep of the client and the Department of Technology, and they would say, well, what are we supposed to do with this? We haven't been connected to this for all these years. So it was just absolutely the right thing to do to move this function over to where it is. I'm a really big fan of the STAR process. I think it's some of the most innovative thinking I've seen around this topic, and I can tell you, in my work with other CPOs across the country, large IT project procurement is consistently the hardest thing that they try to do. It's really hard to do. It's very complex, and I love what I'm seeing out of the Department of Technology, and encourage you, everyone, to support as much as you can. All right? With that, I will yield to Gary. That's all good.
Okay, so the end of February will actually mark my first year as purchasing manager, and I've never been a buyer. So this has been a wild ride. I have a lot of background with internal services, and my thing has always been, I really want who we serve treated as a customer. So when I came into procurement, nothing changed. I want everyone, as other staff members, treated as a customer. And in order to make it easy for me to understand, because we all know that procurement isn't really intuitive, so I needed to understand it, and I also needed an easy way to explain to other staff members throughout the city who maybe didn't understand procurement. And to me, it comes down to 3 questions. Are we getting what you need? Are we being fair? And can we defend our decision? And once I do that, usually I can at least get some understanding with our customers on what we're trying to achieve. Now, once they know that, you know that then now timeliness becomes an issue. It takes too long to get my procurement through. And it probably doesn't happen to you, but happens to me. They go around my process, and they go buy things. And then I got to cut a PO, and I said, how was this bought? But I understand that, though, because we have to have a balance between function and policy. And one of the ways we're working on mitigating that is we're using what's called job order contracting. Okay, now what that does is we have competitively bid pre-established pricing. And this is specifically for maintenance and construction. Now, I have seen some programs that had up to 120,000 lines. So this program can cover a lot of services. For us, what we've been using it for is restrooms, lighting, HVAC, which is really important because when your HVAC goes out, you want a quick response on that. And we are looking into, we don't know if we could do this yet, but we are looking on using it on a huge project, which is a water treatment facility. We're looking into it. I don't know if it will fit the charter. So an easy way for me to remember what job order contracting is, I just think of it as requirements contracts on steroids. That way I know what it is and how we're going to use it. Now currently, we're using a product called EasyIQ. Now this program was established by the National Joint Powers Alliance. So we are able to buy off of this contract to get services. What we're looking to do in the future is establishing a City of Fresno specific job order contracting program. Now there's huge advantages to that, especially as we do it for specific departments. For the airports, we can run it to make sure that it's done with FAA regulations. With transit, we can make sure that we do the procurement program under FTA regulations. This will save us a lot of time and a lot of scrutiny when we go through audits with these agencies. One of the things, the last thing I really wanted to go over was this is kind of a new process, and I've had to talk extensively with our attorney. And what we found out was that this process may not work for general law cities. It can work for charter cities. And it so happens that our charter, the way it's written, we can use this type of procurement tool with limitations. Okay, we cannot use it for above the informal limit unless there is a charter change. Now, we are looking at the possibility, if we do our own program, then can we use it for projects above the informal limit? Possibly, but then we run into another challenge. We're not sure how we're going to deal with the change orders because the attorney was very specific about non-priced items, that we could not use those and we would have to use a regular competitive process. One last thing I want to leave you with is, so you go through this process, market conditions change. So this doesn't necessarily guarantee you the lowest pricing. So sometimes if you do have time to run a procurement and your budget's limited, you may get better pricing. This tool is very good for when you are really strapped for time. You need to get something done. And you can go to this, this program and procure these services. And that's what we're doing to improve our efficiency. And hopefully there'll be time I can come back and report to you how our own program is going.
Questions for the panel? Wow.
In the back.
I have a question. I didn't see all of it, but I wanted to know, is in the STAR program, are you guys including the 19130 government code that says why you have to do outside services in order to purchase?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a requirement of any procurements that you're going to run. So yes, for our side, and yes, from DGS's side.
Maybe drinks win.
That's right.
I think they do, yeah.
I guess they really do want to don't want you between there.
Absolutely. I don't blame them.
So I think the panel was great, so thank you very much. Oh, wait,
Oh.
okay.
I just have an easy question, I hope. With the STAR process, one of the things that I didn't see is oftentimes with large IT projects, we have to go forward for a BCP.
Yes.
And in the past, we couldn't go forward with BCP until we had project approval. So where, I know you've been
This
working
is
with
like-
finance, where in the process would the BCP come in? Figure that out?
So we're working with finance right now and in looking at a couple of things. One is the potential that there may be two BCPs. One that is done after stage 2 to do your planning money for procurement, and the other that would go in line with the project approval. So they would run in parallel. And by bringing finance in from the very beginning, that starts to create the ability to do that. The other thing that we've done from the finance perspective is that the EAWs that you're used to are no longer there. And the documents that you actually fill in for the financial analysis feed into your BCP. They actually become your BCP financial documents.
But with the lead time that's needed for a BCP, and that's typically about a year.
So we're aligning both processes when you have, so right now, you submit, an S1BA in the October timeframe, and then if you have to go into the FSR, you start that sometime in the spring, and then you get that, and then the following fall, you write your BCP for the following year. What we're working with finance is to align those better. And so when we have that, that'll be part of the training documentation that will go out, but we are working with finance to kind of realign those processes so that we're more in line with project approval and budgetary approval.
So we're looking at roughly 2 years minimum from stage 1 business analysis submission to BCP funding available.
It'll depend, because again, S1BAs right now are only allowed to be submitted in October. We'll be taking those, the plan is to start taking those on a free flow basis. Yeah. You're welcome. So with that, we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.